Betrayal has a sound. Today, it was the soft click of expensive heels on hardwood floors, followed by hushed voices that grew louder as I approached our front door. I hadn't expected anyone to be home at 2 in the afternoon, let alone the entire family gathered in what was supposed to be my sanctuary. My name is Harmony, and I should have known something was wrong when Mark stopped kissing me goodbye in the mornings. I pushed open the door to find them arranged like a tribunal. Sophie perched on our leather armchair, her manicured fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the armrest. Mark's parents, Linda and Tom, occupied the sofa, while my husband stood by the fireplace, his back to me. "Well, isn't this cozy?" I said, dropping my design portfolio by the door. "Should I have brought snacks for our impromptu family meeting?" Sophie's lip curled. "This isn't a social call, Harmony. We need to discuss your living situation." "My what?" The room suddenly felt too small, too warm. Linda leaned forward, her pearls catching the afternoon light. "Dear, we've been patient, but it's time you found your own place. This arrangement isn't working anymore." I looked at Mark's back, waiting for him to turn around to defend me. He didn't move. "Arrangement?" My voice came out steadier than I felt. "You mean my marriage? The home I've helped pay for over the last 5 years?" "Don't be dramatic," Sophie cut in. "We all know Mark's been carrying the financial burden. Your little design projects barely cover the groceries." A laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter. "Little projects? I paid for the kitchen renovation last year. I've been contributing to the mortgage since day one." "That's not entirely accurate," Tom spoke up, his first words since I'd entered. He pulled out a folder from his briefcase. "We've been reviewing the property documents. Your name isn't on any of them." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. "That's impossible. Mark and I signed the papers together." Finally, my husband turned around. His face was blank, like a stranger's. "We need to make some changes, Harmony. This isn't working." "What isn't working?" I stepped closer, searching his face for any trace of the man I married. "The fact that I've been supporting us while you've been between projects for the past 8 months. Sophie stood up, smoothing her designer dress. "See? This is exactly why we need you gone. You're always throwing things in Mark's face, making him feel inadequate." "Oh, that's rich coming from you." I turned to face her fully. "How's that promotion working out? The one you got after stealing my branding concepts?" "That's enough!" Linda's voice cracked through the air. "This is precisely why we need to separate. You're toxic for this family, Harmony. Always have been." My hands were shaking now, but not from fear. Rage coursed through me, cold and clarifying. "Mark," I said softly, "is this what you want?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's for the best." "The best for whom?" I walked to the mantel, picked up our wedding photo. "For you? For your sister who's been trying to drive me out since day one? Or for your parents who never thought I was good enough?" "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," Sophie said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "We've already packed most of your things." I set the photo down with deliberate care. "You went through my belongings?" "We took the liberty," Linda said. "The boxes are in the garage." Something inside me shifted then, like a gear clicking into place. I looked at each of them. These people who'd smiled at family dinners, who'd hugged me at holidays, who'd planned this ambush with the precision of executioners. "All right," I said quietly. "I'll go. But remember this moment. Remember exactly how you chose to do this." "Are you threatening us?" Sophie's eyes narrowed. I smiled, and for the first time I saw uncertainty flicker across their faces. "No, Sophie. I'm making a promise. You wanted me gone? Congratulations. You just lost the only person who was keeping your house of cards from collapsing." I turned and walked out, leaving them in silence. In the garage, I saw the neat stack of boxes containing my life, labeled in Sophie's perfect handwriting. I didn't touch them. Instead, I pulled out my phone and dialed my friend Emma's number. They thought they were erasing me. They didn't realize they were setting me free. Emma's spare bedroom felt like exile, but it beat sleeping in my car. 3 days had passed since the ambush, and I'd spent them methodically pulling apart the threads of my marriage, looking for the exact moment it started unraveling. "Your coffee's getting cold," Emma said, leaning against the doorframe. "And you've been staring at that laptop screen for 2 hours." I rubbed my eyes. "I'm going through our joint accounts. Something's not adding up. Besides your husband being a spineless jerk? Besides that," I turned the screen toward her. Look at these transfers. Every month for the past year, large sums moving to an account I don't recognize. Emma sat beside me, squinting at the numbers. That's a lot of money, Harmony. Where's it going? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Mark's name flashed on the screen. I let it ring. You should answer it, Emma said. He's called 6 times today. I picked up on the 7th ring. What? Where are you? His voice was tight, controlled. We need to talk about the Anderson account. The Anderson account, my biggest client. Nothing to discuss. They're my clients. They were your clients through my company's connections. The contract is under my name, I cut in. Check the paperwork, Mark. I made sure of that after Sophie tried to steal my last project. Silence crackled between us. Then, my sister was trying to help you. Help herself, you mean? I pulled up another bank statement. Like you've been helping yourself to our savings? Want to tell me about the transfers to account number 847? The line went dead. Coward, I muttered, tossing the phone aside. Emma touched my arm. What transfers? Nearly $200,000 over the past year. I thought we were saving for a down payment on a bigger house. I laughed, but it came out hollow. Turns out Mark's been moving money somewhere else. I just need to figure out where. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from Sophie. Stop harassing my brother. You're embarrassing yourself. I showed Emma the message. Want to know something funny? Sophie's company just launched a new design division. Brand new office space, fully staffed, equipment, everything. That takes capital. You think Mark gave her your money? I think... My voice caught as another piece clicked into place. I think I need to visit the bank. An hour later, I stood in front of a very uncomfortable bank manager named Steve, who kept tugging at his collar as he reviewed my documents. Mrs. Harrison, while you're listed on the checking account, the savings account was converted to an individual account 6 months ago. Your signature is right here on the transfer authorization. I stared at the signature. It looked like mine, but I'd never signed it. That's forgery. Steve shifted in his chair. That's a serious accusation. Yes, it is. I pulled out my phone and opened my calendar. On the date this was supposedly signed, I was in Seattle at a design conference. I have flight tickets, hotel receipts, and about 50 witnesses who saw me give a keynote speech that morning. The color drained from Steve's face. I'll need to escalate this to our fraud department. Please do. I stood up. And while you're at it, I'd like all records of transfers from that account for the past year. I'm sure the police will find them interesting. Walking out of the bank, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt was still there, but it was hardening into something else. Something sharp and focused. My phone buzzed with another text from Mark. Family dinner tonight. We need to talk. I typed back, yes, we do. I'll bring the bank statements. Emma was waiting in her car outside. How'd it go? They forged my signature. I buckled my seatbelt, hands steady despite the rage coursing through me. Mark and Sophie stole my money to fund her new business venture. They probably thought I'd never notice, that I'd just accept their story about me being a financial burden and leave quietly. What are you gonna do? I watched the bank's glass doors reflect the afternoon sun, thinking about all the careful plans Mark and his family had made to push me out of their lives. I'm going to do exactly what they taught me. Take everything they have. Harmony! Emma's voice held a note of warning. Don't worry. I smiled, and it felt like baring teeth. I won't do anything illegal. I'll just make sure they experience exactly what they planned for me. Complete and utter abandonment, one piece at a time. My phone buzzed again. Linda this time. We expect you at dinner. Time to act like adults. I texted back one word. Perfect. The family dinner felt like walking into a trap with my eyes wide open. Linda's dining room with its pristine tablecloth and carefully arranged place settings might as well have been a courtroom. I arrived 15 minutes early. Bank documents tucked in my bag like ammunition. Sophie was already there, perched at the table like she owned it. You actually came. Wouldn't miss it. I took my usual seat, noting how they'd clustered their chairs at one end, leaving me isolated. How's the new design division? Her smile flickered. Thriving. Unlike some people's careers. Funny you should mention that. I pulled out my phone, opened my emails. The Anderson Group called today. Apparently, someone claiming to represent my interests tried to convince them to transfer their account to a new agency. Your agency. The front door opened and Mark's footsteps echoed in the hallway. Sophie's face hardened. You're delusional. Am I? I turned my phone toward her. Because I have the email chain and the recorded phone call. California's a two-party consent state for recordings, by the way, except when there's reasonable suspicion of fraud. Mark entered, followed by his parents. He stopped short when he saw me, his tie slightly crooked. You're early. Couldn't wait to start. I smiled at Linda. Shall we eat first, or should we discuss how your children committed financial fraud? The crystal water glasses rattled as Tom set down his drink too hard. Now see here. No, you see here. I laid out the bank documents one by one. Forged signatures, unauthorized transfers, theft of client relationships. It's all here, with timestamps, witnesses, and documentation. Mark moved behind Sophie's chair, gripping it. You're overreacting. We can explain. Explain what? How you funneled my money into Sophie's new business? Or how you tried to steal my clients while pushing me out of my own home? Linda's voice cut through the tension. Everything we did was to protect this family. Your family, I corrected her. The same family that watched me pour my inheritance from my dead parents into this house, then forged documents to remove my name from the deed? Silence fell like a blade. That's different, Mark said quietly. The house was always meant to stay in the family. And I wasn't family enough? I pulled out one final document. You know what's interesting? I had my lawyer look into the original house purchase. Turns out there were some irregularities with the down payment documentation. Tom stood up so quickly his chair scraped against the floor. You had no right. I had every right. Just like I had every right to forward those findings to the mortgage company's fraud department this afternoon. Sophie's face went white. You didn't. I did. They're very interested in how you managed to secure that loan with falsified income statements. I stood up, smoothing my dress. Oh, and Mark? Your project manager position? I called your office. They said you were laid off 8 months ago. Funny how the transfers to Sophie's account started right after that. Mark lunged forward. You vindictive? Careful. I held up my phone. Still recording. And assault charges would really complicate things, wouldn't they? Linda's hands trembled as she reached for her water. What do you want? What do I want? I laughed, and the sound seemed to shake the crystal chandelier above us. I want my money back. I want my clients left alone. And I want you all to remember this moment, when your perfect little family scheme fell apart. We can work something out, Mark said, desperation creeping into his voice. Just don't submit those fraud reports. Too late. I picked up my bag. They're already filed. But hey, maybe you can explain to the investigators how you're the real victims here. You're good at playing that role. Sophie stood up, her chair clattering backward. You'll regret this. No, Sophie. I regret believing I could ever be part of this family. But that ends today. I walked to the door, then turned back. Oh, and Linda? You might want to call your country club. Apparently there's some confusion about who's been paying those membership dues for the past 3 years. Spoiler alert, it wasn't Mark. I left them there, surrounded by their expensive furniture and exposed lies. As I drove away, my phone exploded with messages and calls, but I didn't need to read them. I already knew what came next. They thought they were destroying me. Instead, they'd given me everything I needed to destroy them. The investigator's office smelled like old coffee and resignation. Detective Morris shuffled through my documents, her expression carefully neutral. 3 days had passed since the family dinner, and the weight of what I'd set in motion pressed against my chest like a stone. Mrs. Harrison, these allegations are serious. She tapped the papers with a chipped nail. But something's missing here. Missing? She slid a document across her desk. Your husband's signature on the original mortgage. It's not just forged. It's dated 3 months before you two were married. The fluorescent lights suddenly seemed too bright. That's impossible. We bought the house together, after the wedding. According to county records, the house was purchased solely by Mark Harrison and his sister Sophie. She paused, using funds from a trust that technically belonged to their deceased grandmother. The room tilted sideways. I don't understand. I put my inheritance into that house. Did you? Detective Morris opened another file. Because we can't find any record of that transaction. Your inheritance seems to have gone somewhere else entirely. My phone buzzed. Emma texting to check if I was okay. I ignored it, focusing on breathing. Where? An offshore account, opened in your name, but with withdrawal authorizations for both Mark and Sophie Harrison. She leaned forward. Mrs. Harrison, I don't think you're the victim here. I think you're being set up as the perpetrator. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. My exposure of their fraud wasn't just anticipated, it was orchestrated. They wanted me to file those reports, I whispered. It appears so. She closed the file. Right now, the evidence suggests you've been moving money offshore while attempting to claim ownership of property that was never yours. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I can prove. Can you? She looked genuinely sympathetic. Because every document you've provided has been expertly altered to implicate you in a fairly sophisticated financial scheme. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Mark. We need to talk, now. I stood up, gripping the back of my chair. I need a lawyer. That would be wise. Detective Morris handed me her card. And Mrs. Harrison, don't leave town. The parking lot was dark when I emerged. Emma was waiting in her car, but before I could reach her, another vehicle pulled up. Linda's Mercedes. Get in, she said through the rolled-down window. Unless you'd prefer to discuss this with the police? I slid into the back seat. Sophie turned from the passenger side, her smile razor-sharp. Did you really think we wouldn't be prepared? That we'd let you destroy everything we've built? Everything you stole, you mean? My voice sounded distant, hollow. We protected our legacy, Linda said, pulling onto the main road. You were supposed to be grateful for what we gave you, not demand more. Grateful? I laughed, and it came out like breaking glass. For stealing my inheritance? For forging documents? Sophie's smile widened. Prove it. Every signature we used matches yours perfectly. Every transaction has your digital fingerprints. Even your precious clients will testify that you've been acting erratically, making unauthorized decisions. Why? The question burned in my throat. Why go through all this? Linda's eyes met mine in the rearview mirror. Because you were never supposed to stay. Mark needed a wife for appearances, for the trust fund requirements. You served your purpose. My phone buzzed one final time. Emma again. Don't trust them. I have something you need to see. So what now? I asked, watching familiar streets slide by. Now? Sophie turned fully to face me. Now you sign these papers, admitting to everything. You leave town, never contact us again, and we don't press charges. She held out a manila envelope. Through the window behind her, I could see we were heading toward the house. My house. Or what I'd thought was mine. And if I refuse? Then we finish filing the police reports, Linda said calmly. All of them, including the ones about client theft, embezzlement, and fraud. Your choice. I took the envelope, feeling its weight. The weight of their perfect trap, their years of planning. But as we pulled into the driveway, I saw Emma's car parked across the street, and something else caught my eye. A small red light blinking in her dashboard. She was recording everything. Well? Sophie demanded. What's it going to be? I opened the envelope slowly, buying time. They thought they had me cornered, but they'd forgotten something crucial. I had nothing left to lose. Actually, I said, I have a counteroffer. Emma's apartment felt like a war room, scattered with documents and laptop screens showing security footage. The recording from her car played on repeat. Linda's voice crystal clear. Mark needed a wife for appearances, for the trust fund requirements. They didn't just want to frame you, Emma said, pointing to her screen. They needed to marry you specifically. I stared at the document she'd pulled up. My parents' will. How did you get this? I'm a paralegal, remember? I called in some favors. She highlighted a section. Your parents' estate included shares in Harrison Technologies. Small percentage, but significant enough that when combined with Mark's inheritance, they could control the company. The realization hit like a physical blow. That's why they chose me. They needed my shares. And now they need you gone, but not before transferring everything to them. Emma pulled up another document. Look at the date they started planning this. 3 months before you even met Mark. My phone buzzed. Sophie again. Time's running out. Sign or suffer. I turned to Emma. Show me everything. For the next hour, we pieced together their scheme. The fake romance, the rushed marriage, the careful manipulation of documents. They'd been patient, waiting years to spring their trap. There's something else, Emma said quietly. She handed me a flash drive. Security footage from your parents' accident. It wasn't random. My hands went numb. What? The brake lines were tampered with. I can't prove who did it, but 3 days before the accident, guess who was seen near your parents' house? The security footage showed Tom, Mark's father, wearing mechanic's coveralls. My phone rang. Mark this time. I answered on speaker. Have you made your decision? His voice was cold, unfamiliar. Actually, I have some questions first. I kept my voice steady. Like why your father was working on my parents' car 3 days before they died. Silence crackled across the line. Then, you're desperate, Harmony. Making wild accusations won't help you. No? Then explain why you married me exactly 3 months after their death. The minimum waiting period for accessing their shares. I watched the footage again. Tom's familiar figure moving with purpose. Explain why your family needed those shares so badly. Sign the papers, he snapped. Or tomorrow the police get evidence of your embezzlement, fraud, and now, harassment. Funny thing about evidence, I said. It works both ways. Check your email. I heard the notification ping through the phone, followed by sharp intake of breath. You're bluffing, he whispered. Am I? That's just a sample. I have more. Years of documentation, security footage, banking records, everything Emma and I have gathered. One call, and it all goes to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. You'll implicate yourself. Maybe. But I've got nothing left to lose, remember? You made sure of that. I leaned closer to the phone. Here's my counteroffer. Return my inheritance, confess to the fraud, or I burn everything down, including proof of your father's involvement in my parents' death. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I ended the call, hands shaking. Emma touched my arm. Are you sure about this? They could still hurt you. They already have. I stood up, gathering the documents. But now they know I can hurt them back. My phone lit up with texts. First Sophie, then Linda, finally Tom. Each message more desperate than the last. They'd underestimated me. Thought I was weak because I'd trusted them, loved them. What's the next move? Emma asked. I pulled up the email I'd drafted earlier, addressed to the Harrison Technologies Board of Directors. Attached were documents proving Mark and Sophie's mismanagement, the fraud, the theft. Everything except my parents' accident. That was my insurance policy. Now, I hit send. Now we watch them tear each other apart trying to save themselves. Emma's laptop pinged with notifications. The family's private chat exploding with accusations and threats. They were already turning on each other. They'll come after you harder, Emma warned. Let them. I watched the chaos unfold on screen. They taught me well how to lie, how to manipulate, how to destroy someone from the inside out. Time they learned what a good student I've been. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from Mark. You've just started a war. I typed back, no, I'm finishing one you started years ago. The board meeting was tomorrow. By sunset, the Harrison family's carefully constructed world would begin to crumble, and I would be there to watch every moment of their destruction. The Harrison Technologies boardroom felt like a tomb, all mahogany and muted lighting. I sat alone at the end of the table, watching board members file in, their faces carefully neutral. Mark and Sophie entered last, followed by their parents. None of them looked at me. Before we begin, the board chairman said, I understand Mrs. Harrison has evidence of financial irregularities she'd like to present. I opened my laptop, but before I could speak, Mark stood. Actually, we have something to present first. He nodded to Sophie, who distributed folders to each board member. Evidence of extensive fraud and embezzlement perpetrated by my wife. My fingers froze over the keyboard. The documents they were reviewing weren't the ones I'd sent. They were perfect forgeries, showing my signature on transactions I'd never seen. These are fake, I said, but my voice sounded thin even to me. Sophie smiled. The banking records say otherwise, along with witness statements from clients describing your erratic behavior and unauthorized actions. The chairman frowned at the papers. These are very serious allegations, Mrs. Harrison. Check your email, I said. I sent you proof of their fraud last night. We received no such email, another board member said. My stomach dropped. I pulled up my sent folder. Empty. Somehow they'd accessed my account, erased everything. I looked at Emma's seat. Empty. She should have been here with the backup files. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Emma's been detained. Car trouble. Shame about those backup files in her trunk. Mrs. Harrison! The chairman's voice cut through my panic. "Do you have any evidence to support your claims?" Linda spoke up, her voice trembling with practiced concern. "We tried to help her. After her parents' death, she became unstable, started making accusations, trying to take control of assets that were never hers." "That's not—" I started, but Tom interrupted. "We have security footage," he said quietly, "of her accessing restricted accounts after hours, transferring funds. We didn't want to believe it, but—" The board members exchanged glances. I watched my carefully constructed plan crumble as they nodded along with the fabricated evidence. "I move to suspend all of Mrs. Harrison's access immediately," Sophie said, "and initiate a full investigation." "Seconded," Mark added, not meeting my eyes. The vote was unanimous. Security guards appeared at my elbows, ready to escort me out, but I had one card left to play. "Ask Tom about my parents' car," I said loudly. "Ask him why he tampered with their brakes 3 days before their accident." The room went silent. Tom's face drained of color. "More baseless accusations," Linda said quickly, but I saw the flash of fear in her eyes. "We have footage," I pressed. "Date stamped, showing me helping your father with routine maintenance," Tom cut in smoothly. "Which he requested, as documented in these emails." He pulled out another perfect forgery, and I realized how thoroughly they'd covered every angle. The chairman cleared his throat. "I think we've heard enough. Mrs. Harrison, please surrender your credentials and leave the premises. The authorities will be notified of our findings." As security led me out, I caught Mark's eye. For a moment, his mask slipped, and I saw something like regret. Then Sophie touched his arm, and he turned away. In the parking lot, my car's tires were slashed. Emma wasn't answering her phone. My bank accounts were frozen. They'd thought of everything, dismantled every piece of evidence, corrupted or threatened every witness. My phone buzzed one final time. "Sophie, you should have taken our first offer. Now you'll lose everything." I sat on the curb, watching the sun set behind the Harrison Technologies building. They'd won. Completely, utterly won. I had no money, no evidence, no allies. Even Emma was gone, probably threatened into silence. A police car rolled slowly through the parking lot, the officer inside watching me. Soon they'd come with questions, with warrants, with handcuffs. The Harrisons would watch from their windows, satisfied that they'd finally destroyed me completely. But as I sat there, something strange happened. The despair didn't crush me. It crystallized. They thought they'd taken everything, but they'd forgotten something crucial. The truth about my parents' death. I might not have proof anymore, but I had certainty. And sometimes, certainty was enough. I stood up, brushing off my clothes. They wanted me desperate, broken, alone. Instead, they'd given me clarity. If I was going down, I'd make sure to drag their darkest secrets into the light with me. My phone buzzed again. An unknown number. "Need a ride?" Maybe I wasn't as alone as they thought. The annual Harrison Family Gala buzzed with nervous energy. Through the glittering crowd, I watched Sophie work the room, her designer dress a perfect match for her practiced smile. Mark stood with the board members, champagne in hand, while Linda and Tom greeted guests near the entrance. Emma's text flashed on my phone. "Files uploaded. Ready when you are." I smoothed my black dress, the one Mark had bought me for our first anniversary, and moved toward the podium. The Harrisons hadn't noticed me yet, too busy basking in their apparent victory. 2 weeks of letting them think they'd won had made them careless. "Ladies and gentlemen," I tapped the microphone, watching their heads snap up in unison. "I'd like to propose a toast." Sophie started forward, but Mark grabbed her arm, his face pale. He knew that tone in my voice. "To family," I continued, raising my glass. "And to secrets, especially the ones we keep in safety deposit boxes." Tom's champagne glass slipped from his fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "Harmony," Linda stepped forward, her smile brittle. "This isn't the time. It's exactly the time." I nodded to Emma at the back of the room. The projector hummed to life, displaying banking records, the real ones, retrieved from Tom's secret vault. "Would anyone like to explain why Harrison Technologies funds were used to bribe a mechanic 3 days before my parents' accident?" The room went silent. On screen, transaction after transaction scrolled past, proof of their years of manipulation, including Tom's payment to the mechanic who'd later died in his own suspicious accident. Or perhaps I continued. We should discuss the trust fund conditions? The ones requiring Mark to be married to access his inheritance? Sophie lunged for the podium, but security, my security, hired with Emma's help, blocked her path. You're making a mistake, Mark's voice cracked. We can still fix this. Fix what, Mark? The fraud? The theft? Or my parents' murder? I turned to the shocked crowd. They needed my shares to control the company. My parents wouldn't sell, so they eliminated the problem. Then they arranged our perfect romance, counting on my grief to make me vulnerable. Prove it, Sophie snarled, but her confidence was cracking. Already did. I gestured to the FBI agents emerging from the crowd. Everything's been verified. The agents have been building their case for weeks, ever since you tried to frame me at the board meeting. Linda collapsed into a chair, her carefully maintained facade crumbling. Tom reached for her, but an agent stepped between them. You could have had everything, Mark said quietly, handcuffs clicking around his wrists. We would have given you wealth, status. You killed my parents. My voice didn't shake. You stole my life and tried to destroy me when I discovered the truth. There's not enough wealth in the world to make that right. Sophie struggled against the agents holding her. You think you've won? You're nothing without us. No, Sophie, I was nothing with you. That was the point. I watched them being led away, these people who'd orchestrated my entire life. You taught me how to deceive, manipulate, and destroy. Consider this my final thank you. The room erupted in chaos, reporters pushing forward, board members demanding explanations, police securing evidence. Through it all, I stood at the podium, watching the Harrison family's empire crumble. Tom turned back at the door, his face ashen. How did you know about the safety deposit box? I didn't, I smiled. But I knew you'd never trust electronic records for the really damaging evidence. You're too old school. After that, it was just a matter of following Linda on her weekly visits to the bank. Mark stopped at the threshold, looking back one last time. For a moment, I saw the man I thought I'd married, before the mask fell away completely. I did love you, he said. In my way. I know, that's what makes this perfect. I raised my glass to him. You taught me that love is the deadliest weapon of all. The doors closed behind them, and the sound echoed through the ballroom like a final heartbeat. Emma appeared at my side, squeezing my hand. Was it worth it? She asked softly. I watched the FBI agents boxing up evidence, the reporters scrambling to break the story, the board members already discussing emergency measures, years of planning, manipulation, and murder, all exposed in a single night. Ask me tomorrow, I said, setting down my untouched champagne. When justice finally feels like enough. The Harrison house stood empty now, a hollow monument to carefully crafted lies. I walked through each room with the estate agent, noting places where family photos once hung, where holiday dinners had been staged, where every moment of warmth had been calculated for maximum effect. The board is offering fair market value, she said, checking her tablet. Given the circumstances, they're eager to distance themselves from the Harrison name. I paused at the study doorway, remembering Mark's face the day they arrested him. I'll take it. Mrs. Harrison, Harmony, she hesitated. Are you sure? After everything that happened here? The trial had dominated headlines for weeks. Mark took a plea deal, turning on his family in exchange for leniency. Sophie faced 20 years for fraud and conspiracy. Tom's confession about my parents' death earned him life without parole. Linda had a breakdown on the witness stand, revealing decades of manipulation and deceit. I'm sure. I ran my hand along the mahogany doorframe. Some things need to be dismantled from the inside. Emma helped me pack up the remaining Harrison belongings. Evidence of a life meticulously designed to trap me. In Linda's closet, we found a box of photographs. Me at college events, long before I met Mark. They'd been studying me, planning their approach for years. What should we do with these? Emma asked. Leave them for the lawyers. I turned away, but something caught my eye. A slight discoloration in the closet's back panel. Wait. The panel swung open easily, revealing a hidden safe. Inside, I found what I'd been searching for since my parents died. Their original will, untampered with, along with letters they'd written about Harrison Technologies' illegal practices. They'd known. They'd been gathering evidence. They didn't just kill them to get their shares, I whispered. They killed them to stop them from exposing everything. Emma touched my arm. Does this change things? No, I closed the safe, tucking the documents away. It just means I finished what they started. The doorbell rang. Detective Morris, holding a thick envelope. Final paperwork from the DA's office, she said, following me to the kitchen. Mark's allocution statement. Thought you might want to read it. I left it unopened on the counter. Did he mention why? Why me specifically? Said you reminded him of someone, a girl from college who turned down his proposal. First time he'd failed at anything, she shrugged. His family helped him destroy her life too. Became their pattern. Until now. Until now. She headed for the door, then turned back. The house. What will you do with it? Through the window, I could see the garden where Mark had proposed, where every calculated moment of our relationship had played out like scenes from a script. Turn it into something true, I said. That evening, as Emma left with the last boxes, I stood in the empty foyer. The Harrison legacy lay in ruins, their company reorganized, their reputation destroyed, their carefully constructed world dismantled, piece by piece. They'd taught me everything about revenge, thinking I'd never use it against them. My phone buzzed, a message from Mark's prison email. I underestimated you. I typed back, no, you overestimated yourself. Upstairs, in what was once our bedroom, I found one last surprise, a loose floorboard containing a small box. Inside were photos of my parents, surveillance shots from the days before their death, but behind those was something else. Pictures of me as a child, happy and free, taken years before the Harrisons chose me as their target. They'd watched me grow up, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They'd studied my every weakness, planning to exploit them all. Instead, they'd given me the greatest strength of all, the ability to see through their lies. I placed the box with the other evidence and walked through the house one final time, turning off lights, closing doors. Tomorrow, contractors would begin transforming it into a shelter for survivors of financial abuse. The Harrison name would fade from its walls, replaced by something stronger, truth. Outside, the evening air carried the scent of approaching rain. I locked the door, pocketed the key, and walked away without looking back. They'd tried to write my story, but in the end, I'd rewritten theirs. Some might call it revenge. I called it justice. The rain began to fall, washing away the last traces of the family that had tried to own me. I smiled, feeling the drops on my face, and for the first time in years, every breath tasted like freedom.